Welcome into the Thunder Basketball Universe presented by COOP Ale Works. Last week, we talked all things defense, so naturally, we're going to dive into the other end of the floor this week and talk all things offense. And throughout the season, we saw so many tremendous strides of individual growth and development on the offensive end, Gallo, but most importantly, we saw a lot of growth as a group.
Yeah, I think that, as Sam Presti said in his end-of-season interview, the overall arc of the team was really something that maybe even outshined some of the individual growth that we saw throughout the year. Of course, we saw guys like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander.
Mm-hmm.
He really turned a corner in January and was able to play an even more efficient style of basketball. Josh Giddey kind of came into his own as the season went along. You know, Trey Mann, of course, was able to kind of find his zone and find what worked for him offensively. Darius Bazley, of course, able to find like that style of play for him, quick decisions, catch, shoot, drive, simple basketball. But all of that kind of dovetailed alongside of the overall growth of the Thunder team on the offensive end of the floor. And there's some really exciting things that I know that we're going to flesh out here today.
One area or one specific instance where this offensive growth as a team really shined through. In fact, it was so impressionable for Sam Presti that he brought it up in his end of season press conference with the media. And that game was January 17th. At Dallas. Gallo, you and I were there. We saw this firsthand. We know exactly what he's talking about. It was in the third quarter, second half of the third quarter, the last 6 minutes of that stretch. The Thunder were down by 22 in that game. And then they went on a massive run, shaved it down to as little as 2 points in that quarter. And that run was really something that showed that this group has taken a lot of strides offensively because they were playing with rhythm instead of patterns.
Yeah, you know that you and I had a great view to that 24-5 run because we were packed in like sardines
Yes.
in the second row there
Yes.
in Dallas. And we had this great view kind of right from Mark Dagnall's vantage point on one end of the floor.
Laptops on our laps. They were actual laptops that day. Yes.
But you're right. I mean, it was a pure flow state out on the floor. And of course, it started with the defensive end of the floor. Lou Dort kind of got things going with that big time block. But offensively is where the Thunder was not just like unconscious in terms of making these ridiculous tough shots. It was the shots that were created and manufactured were high efficiency, easy step into rhythm shots, and ones that didn't necessarily require a play call. It was just playing off of each other instinctually. And so I think we're going to kind of break down what this run was like, and not necessarily because each of these individual plays matters so much, but it's more instructive of what this Thunder team playing at an elite level can look like, and just the varied ways when you have a balanced offensive attack that you're going to be able to get guys open shots and quickly, in a matter of 6 minutes, put up 24 points on the board.
24 points in this stretch. It was incredible seeing all the different guys get involved offensively. That's what stuck out the most to me from our vantage point. After going back and rewatching this again, it just was so impressive to see the ball move. It didn't stick. Guys were getting up the floor quickly, making solid, simple decisions. There wasn't a lot of razzle-dazzle in this stretch. It was just efficient, solid basketball, and every single guy got involved.
In fact, I guess maybe you could say that the only play that really was just this highlight-worthy play was the step back three from Shai that got the run started. But after that, all 6 baskets were assisted, and everything else came at the free throw line. So, you know, obviously the free throw line is probably one of the most, if not the most efficient place to score. And so you're going to balance that with what we saw, which was continued creation, like a dribble drive, dump off from Trey Mann to Jeremiah Robinson-Earl.
So this is actually what I want to talk about. Some of the best plays from that stretch that really kind of highlight why this stretch was important and why it was stuck so much in Sam Presti's head. The one that stuck out the most for me was there was a play where it ended up being a JRE reverse layup, but it hit the hands of 3 different players in that play. Each guy gave up a good shot for a great shot. So I think the ball started in Shai's hands. It went over to Trey Mann in the corner. He didn't have a good shot, but he drove baseline and found Jeremiah Robinson-Earl, who then could have tried to go up, but instead pump faked his defender and then went to the other side of the rim. Just solid, quick decisions, recognizing that the shot that I give up now is going to lead to a better shot later.
And attacking closeouts without hesitation, absolutely critical, because once you've gained that little bit of an advantage, you've got to go. You've got to make a decision one way or the other. If that closeout's coming at you really hard, okay, that's my signal. get into the lane,
right,
and I've got a 2-on-1 or a 3-on-2 situation potentially on the backside.
Yes. The other thing that really stuck out to me during this stretch, there were 2 sideline out of bounds plays that the Thunder had in this stretch. Obviously, the go-to guy for those sort of plays, Josh Giddey, but the Thunder scored on each of those, and it wasn't necessarily on the first pass. It was because they executed out of that action and found the right shot. And I think Shea scored on both of these sideline out of bounds plays, or he was the recipient of that bucket. But the execution in those set plays as well really was encouraging to see.
And that's how you know a team is really in that rhythm, as you're saying, not patterns,
right?
More rhythm. If you're having to inbound the ball out of the sideline, that means there's either been a foul or a kickball or a deflection. Somehow your offensive rhythm, as we would normally think about it within the flow of a 24-second shot clock, somehow that's been disrupted.
Yeah.
Yet you're still playing kind of with just that like pulsating energy to get the ball moving and flowing and finding the good shot.
Yeah, sideline out of bounds is actually like a lot different than like your typical baseline out of bounds or just like going full court. That is the whole angle and perspective you have as a point guard. It's a little bit different. For me personally, I loved sideline because you had a better vantage point and the kind of your more normal vantage point that you would have at like the center of the floor or something like that. When you're taking it on the sideline, you kind of have that nice same perspective versus underneath the rim where everything is backwards and guys are right up on you, or everything seems bigger and taller. I don't know, but sideline, everything can be a little bit more stretched out. So that was, for me personally, I kind of like sideline.
Well, and under the rim, you've got the backboard,
exactly,
and the rim to
another
worry
defender,
about, which is a 6th, 7th defender.
Exactly. So seeing the guys execute on those was really, really cool to see. One last thing I wanted to bring up about this particular stretch that I think also made a big impression. Obviously, Shea had himself a really impressive quarter, 15 points in this stretch, but he got to the free throw line.
Yeah.
And Gallo, you wrote about this in your article where, attacking downhill, getting to the paint, doesn't always have to necessarily result in a layup, but getting to the free throw line, that's the most efficient shot in basketball.
Yeah, so this week's feature story is about the offense and about some of those core characteristics, and one of them has to be having that free throw advantage.
Yeah.
I mean, just over the course of a long season, in the course of games, they can come down to the free throw line. And fortunately, the Thunder has one of the top 10 players in the league in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at getting to the free throw line, over 7 attempts a game.
Right.
And so for him to get nearly that many or about that many in one quarter was sensational. And it's actually kind of a continuation of a trend that we saw with Shai's third quarters throughout the season, where he was one of the best third quarter scorers in the entire NBA.
Which was so interesting to see. And he didn't have much of a reason to give us about why that was the case. But it is something to be said about, learning the game and figuring things out. And then at halftime, all of those things click and you come out with all those lessons learned.
Yeah, he definitely recognized how to lay in wait, set his teammates up in the first halves of games, register what the defense's coverages are looking like, and then go out and attack them.
Yes. So that third quarter, really impressive and kind of set a precedent for this team that this is the style, this is the goal. This is what you want to try to get to. Playing to this kind of not necessarily formulaic basketball, but you're sticking to your principles and you're just finding the right play and playing with each other, off of each other in sort of that flow state.
Yeah, and an even better case scenario is once these guys have matured and grown and this has been drilled into them and they've had to go through the rigors of sustaining that for long periods of time, it's just second nature. It's instinctual. So that registering of, okay, what are the best options? Am I finding the most efficient shot? None of that is even being thought about when they're on the court. That is just completely innate. And so that's what the Thunder, that's why the habits that the Thunder is building right now are so critical. These guys, they're learning how to play an efficient, sustainable, long-term style of basketball so that by the time, as we mentioned on the defense podcast, by the time they are the biggest and most skilled guys in the NBA, which could be sometime in the years to come, they've already had that right way of playing ingrained.
Yes. So I'm really glad that Sam brought up this specific stretch for the Thunder because it gave us something to go back and look to and kind of register and mark and tab for the future for that reason of like, okay, this is the goal. This is what we're trying to get to. These are the habits that the team is trying to instill. And now you have something to kind of like back it up to and see tangibly kind of what that looks like.
Yeah. So if you've got NBA League Pass, go back and watch that game, or at least that quarter, or if you're watching here on YouTube.
We're going to dive into the individual growth and the team growth on the offensive end from this team throughout the season. But first, we're going to take a short break. Don't go anywhere.
COOP Ale Works is the proud sponsor of Thunder Basketball Universe. Brewers of the fan favorites F5 IPA and 99-calorie Ice Chest IPA. You'll find those and many more COOP beers at retailers across Oklahoma. Learn more at CoopAleWorks.com.
So we've already talked about the fact that you have written an article. It's on OKCThunder.com. You're going to want to check that out because it dives into the offensive style that the Thunder was working to establish. Similar to the defensive end that we talked about last week, the Thunder is just trying to lay a foundation, right? They were trying to establish a style of play that supersedes the players on the floor and supersedes any lineup, really something that can just be transferred season to season to season and everybody can be a part of. The Thunder was able to accomplish a lot of that, and it came down to some key pillars on that offensive end that the team had to stick to.
Yeah, and as we talked about on the defensive side, sometimes your personnel is going to dictate just how efficient you are in some of these categories, just how effective you are. But the overall goal right now, as we were just talking about, is lay the foundation for how this team wants to play. Start to instill the values of the efficient basketball within these young Thunder players. So, for example, playing through the paint, taking a high volume of three-point shots, finding that balance on the offensive end so that teams aren't loaded up on one player every single night. Those are things that can be installed as basics in these players right now so that once the skill level rises, once the shooting percentages start to soar, those things just are only amplified.
Yeah.
And so, I think the first one, and it's really the foundational pillar number one that the Thunder had here, was trying to play through the paint. And they, I think, saw the benefits of that throughout the season.
And this goes to your point where personnel will dictate the efficiency of some of these categories, because when you have the league leader in drives per game in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, for the past 2 years running, by the way, he's led the league in this category, that is going to influence a lot of how other guys are able to get involved offensively as well. So Shai was obviously the head of the snake in being able to get downhill. The Thunder as a group led the league in drives per game this past season, but even when Shai was out, and he was out for a pretty significant stretch there in this season, the Thunder still found opportunities to get downhill, attack the paint, find those opportunities because they saw the benefits of that, and they were building those habits even while Shai was on the floor.
Yeah, it's kind of back to that Trey Mann example that we used in the Dallas game. Is Shai made the initial drive, but that next drive was created because of the first time that the ball touched the paint.
Yes.
So you're kind of just getting these overlapping drives. It's like dive bombing into the lane over and over again. And when you do that 61 times in a game, you're going to get open cracks. And that's how many times a game the Thunder made drives that this last season. They ranked top 5 in points and in free throw attempts on drives and assists and in passes, passed the ball about 43% of the time when they made those drives. So you had some nice balance there as well once you got into the lane.
I want to get your opinion on this because this was something that I found very interesting throughout the season. When you lead the league in drives per game, you're going to get schemed against. It's pretty easy to scout and understand what we have to do defensively to stop you. And yet the Thunder's drive numbers didn't suffer, and they were still able to find opportunities to get cracks, get to the rim, get under in that restricted area and find those opportunities. So what did you see throughout the season in terms of still being able to find those opportunities even when teams were literally building a wall around the paint to stop them?
I'll use a word that Mark Daignault used: stubbornness.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Thunder was stubborn about getting to the paint. They were not going to just be denied in that. They were going to get downhill. They were going to get into the lane. Paris, I have to wonder, what was the opposing teams loading up and scouting against you when you were on the floor? Were they worried about the drive? Were they worried about the shot?
I was surrounded by a lot of shooters in my time, so it was more about chasing folks off the 3-point line. So the driving lanes were wide open for me. Have the rim, please, but don't have the 3-point line. But that makes a lot of sense, and you saw that a lot with I remember specifically, when the ball wasn't going through the hoop for the Thunder, just things weren't working their way. Coach Daignault always referred to it as finding grimier ways to score. Yeah. And sometimes that just meant it's not going to be pretty, but we got to get the job done. So that means getting my head down to the rim, or maybe I don't get all the way to the paint, but if a quick drive and kick in the second action, like you're saying, just kind of one after the other, that drive and kick game can really break down a defense. And it might not be the first action, but that second one can oftentimes be the one. It only takes one crack to really get the defense moving.
Well, and what that does is open up those angles, those passing angles, so that they're simple decisions when you decide to kick out to the 3-point line. Mm-hmm. And, when you've got that, when you're in the lane and you've got one defender on the weak side trying to decide, okay, am I crunching down and helping in the paint? Am I
Right.
rushing? Am I guarding the corner? Am I going to have to X out and get up to the guy that's on the wing?
Yeah.
Those decisions are becoming a lot easier, and those gaps that you have to make the pass are a lot wider, and that's going to limit your turnovers. I think that's one thing that was really underrated, and we often talk about, we often see what's happening, but another story is what's not happening on the floor. And this is the youngest team in the NBA, and it was right there in the middle of the pack in terms of turnovers per game.
Right.
Meaning something that should be, frankly, a weakness of a team that's at this stage of its development cycle was not at all. And,
especially when you prioritize ball movement as a team.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Ball movement's going to naturally open you up to turnovers.
Right, exactly. But the other thing, too, was that Coach Dagnall said this multiple times throughout the season, was like, we're not going to knock turnovers when they happen, because we'd rather have the turnover than not have the ball movement, essentially. So it's like, we're not going to really slap folks on the wrist for making those sort of turnovers when they're within the flow of the offense and they're trying to make that right play, because we want to instill the habit of finding that open shooter and moving the ball.
And that's why the emphasis on driving, getting downhill, putting pressure on the lane is so critical, because it actually solves both issues, right? You're getting to an efficient spot on the floor, but you're also creating the types of openings and separations for good, clean passes that you're reducing your turnover threat as well.
Exactly.
So that sort of flows nicely into the other core tenet, the next core tenet in terms of trying to build an efficient offensive style, and that is taking a high volume of 3-point shots. We just see that is the reality in the NBA. Unless you have a transcendent player like an MVP like Nikola Jokic or Joel Embiid or Kevin Durant, who are just dominant in the paint or in the mid-range or some of these other areas of the floor where they bend the numbers, you've got to take a high volume of threes. And the Thunder took a higher percentage of its shots as 3-pointers this season than it ever has in its history.
And they were top of the league in terms of like the percentage of their overall field goal attempts that came from the paint and the 3-point line. They were right up there at the top of the league. And that shows that, the team understands the efficiency that comes with that style of play, especially when you're starting with getting to the paint. When you put the priority on the paint, not the 3-point, like let the three come from the paint, essentially. That opens up catch and shoot opportunities. And I love this because when you're by yourself shooting at home.
I'm so glad you're going to say this. Yeah, I love it.
You know exactly where I'm going with this. When you're by yourself shooting at home, you always get the rebound from under the rim. It always comes from, especially if you have a rebounder. Now, if you don't have a rebounder, this is different. But if you have a rebounder, which I normally
big shout out to Paris's dad.
Yes,
mom.
I appreciate you. Yeah. Absolutely. But if you have a rebounder, the ball is always coming back out to you to shoot that 3 from under the rim. So in a game, when you have a drive and kick, that is simulating that exact same thing that you practice over and over and over again by yourself. And
it's pure muscle memory.
And it's the highest efficient, the most efficient 3-point shot you can take.
Yeah, I love that point, Paris. And you're spot on in terms of these are the types of shots that the Thunder is trying to generate and trying to train its players to generate, so that, look, the Thunder was a bad 3-point shooting team this year. There's no way. I mean, Sam Presti said it. Mark Daigneault said it flat out. It was not a good 3-point shooting team. But it was the youngest team in the league. And as we all know, the transition to the 3-point line in the NBA is a serious transition that takes some time to make. So again, you're investing in the concept that these 3-point shots, a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, those percentages are going to be much higher than they are right now. And if you're taking the 7th most 3-pointers in the entire NBA per game, and you're getting a higher percentage of them are going to go, then your scoreboards are going to look a lot different.
Very true. It also helps when you have the amount of versatility that the Thunder had on its roster. There were not a lot of guys on the team who didn't have the green light to shoot it when they were open from behind the arc. And you've got pick and pop guys like JRE, Mike Muscala. We saw Derek Favors step out behind the arc and try his hand at some threes as well. But when you have that level of versatility, where kind of everybody on the floor has that green light to shoot it, everybody's a threat. And so suddenly you have to go out and contest that 3-point shot. But again, if you're prioritizing the paint, that makes it easy to get downhill. They have to contest out. You're giving yourself advantages at every corner.
Well, I have looked at the Thunder's rookie class really over these first 2 big features as sort of a conduit to explain where the Thunder is going. And I just look at this rookie class. Josh Giddey can play point guard through small forward.
Yep.
Trey Mann can play point guard, shooting guard. Aaron Wiggins can play 2, 3, 4. Jeremiah Robinson-Earl can play 4 and 5.
Yes.
Guess what all 4 of those guys did very frequently this year?
Shoot
They
threes.
launched threes.
Yes.
They took a ton of threes. And I think it just goes to show, like, this next iteration of the Thunder organization, there is going to be no differentiation between whether you're a 1 or a 2 or a 3 or a 4 or a 5, and whether you are going to be incentivized by this team to take 3-point shots. Doesn't matter. You're going to shoot them.
This point flows perfectly into the last point here, and it's a reason behind this last point, and it was the incredible balanced scoring that we saw from the Thunder throughout this season. I feel like this is a result of a lot of what we've been talking about with those first 2 points. The paint touches, the 3-point shooting, the drive and kicks, the ball movement. It all led to some incredible balanced scoring. And Gallo, I'm stealing from your article here, so you'll have to forgive me. Quote here.
No
Nick
forgiveness
Gallo.
needed.
29 games where every player scored this season that stepped onto the floor for the Thunder. Impressive stuff.
Yeah, and 20 games that the Thunder had at least 25 assists. And while other teams certainly had more games with 25 or more assists, you have to remember that the Thunder was not a high-scoring team this year. They didn't get a ton of field goals to actually drop in comparison to some of their counterparts. So what you're really focused on in that situation is a little bit more of like the assist rate. What percentage of made baskets were coming off of assists? When you have that type of assisting that's happening, you're going to get balanced scoring. It's not just like player A passes it to player B over and over and over again.
Right.
Like, you know, maybe the Wilt Chamberlain days of the NBA and you're going to rack up a ton of
feed the
assists
beast,
that way. Right. What's happening in terms of this like 5-man free flow offensive style is those assists are being, you know, distributed throughout the roster, throughout the 5-man unit quite evenly.
Right. And if we go back to that 6-minute stretch in Dallas, Gallo, nearly every bucket during that 6-minute stretch was assisted.
Right. 6 out of the 7. And, you know, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander can have a step back 3 as a treat here, you know, and just get things started. He got the mojo going in that stretch. And then everything else is, and that's those types of shots, though. I mean, there's a reason why we saw him take that. Of course. You got to keep the defense honest. Right. And you got to keep them playing up on you to open up the drives, to open up the drive and kicks and the continuous movement in the drive and redrive, and then finally something resulting in a catch and shoot 3 or a layup. By the way, the Thunder made 15 layups a game last year. So you're getting those 3s, you're getting the layups, efficient shots, and most of them assisted too. While
there's this obviously statistical benefit to doing this, there's also a really big mental aspect of this that I noticed throughout the season. When you prioritize ball movement like the Thunder did, and every guy on the floor is looking to find the best play and the open play, the open guy, it keeps everybody engaged on the floor. Every single guy has to be locked in, because if Trey Mann drives, yes, he can finish clearly. If Shai drives, yes, obviously he can finish at the rim. But if you're not ready, that ball might be coming right back out to you. And if you're not ready to shoot it, you've missed an opportunity. And that could have been the best shot open on the floor. So you have to be ready, and it keeps everybody locked in and engaged.
The way that the game has evolved is, you know, when you have so many guys that are able to shoot the 3-point shot, they're standing there, they're waiting to shoot. If your movement is just one guy isolating, breaking down the defense and kicking out, the game sort of becomes baseball. You get one chance to at your swing at the shot when you're standing in the corner. You catch, you shoot, you hope it goes in. Right. Just like standing in the batter's box and taking your hack and hoping you make contact. And what the Thunder wants to avoid is exactly that. They want this to be free flowing, where every guy who has ball, who touches the ball, is a triple threat each time they touch it. Right. And as you're pointing out, not only is that good for the offensive numbers, but it's good over the iteration of possessions over the course of a game. By the time it's the fourth quarter, everybody's got that blood pumping and the juice flowing. They've felt the ball. You know, I can't imagine going 20 minutes of real life time without touching the ball in a meaningful way, other than it slapping against my palms and I got to get it up and shoot it.
Yes. And then it all kind of is it's a circle effect, right? Like, because if every guy is engaged and is playing as if they are a threat on the offensive end, the defense has to respect that. And then now that opens things up for guys to drive, which opens things up for kickouts. So it all is a very symbiotic. It's exhausting. Our brains are always working over here. But it all works together kind of just in perfect harmony. So it's really, and it makes it really fun to watch, just like we watched with that 6-minute stretch in Dallas. All right. So that's the team growth. And if you want more on that, go to OKCThunder.com. Check out Nick Gallo's article. He is going in depth on all of those topics. And now, before we let you go, we got to talk about some of the individual growth that we saw throughout the season offensively, because we saw several instances of this, because there's so many young guys on this team. Of course, they're going to take strides offensively. So Nick, I'll let you go first with your favorite offensive growth moment from the season.
I got to point out Alexei Pokusevski. For the second straight year, he went and played for the Oklahoma City Blue, and when he came back to the Thunder, he was a completely different player.
Yeah.
I got to just take you through his numbers after the All-Star break.
Okay.
So 19 games, he made 10 starts. His shooting percentages went up by 5 percentage points in terms of field goal percentage. About the same, 4 percentage points from the three-point line. A massive jump at the free throw line.
Mm-hmm.
And then he also averaged 12 points, 7 rebounds, and 4.5 assists per game in that 19-game stretch after the All-Star break. Once again, we saw him be able to take that next step forward in terms of just his comfort, efficiency on the floor. And the big thing was he became a playmaker.
Yes.
And the Thunder trusted him with the ball in his hands to be able to generate things for other players. It wasn't just what can we get that's comfortable in terms of Poku. And it all culminated with a triple-double.
How about that for Poku? He got his triple-double. And I love that you pointed out Poku, because he was my second choice in this offensive growth conversation. And it's because this is the same thing that happened last season for Poku, right? He had the opportunity to go to the G League, really get a lot of reps in, a lot of time with the OKC Blue, came back, showed more poise, more discipline, restraint, and the same thing happened this season. And so he was able to really make sound, simple decisions, and they were magnificent. It really it allowed him to blossom offensively because he simplified his game. And so we saw what he was really able to do at every level of the floor, which led to a triple-double.
Yeah, so great to see. I mean, again, we just have to remember how young he is, how young guys like Teo Maladone and Darius Baisley are. There is still so much left for them on their runways. And so to get these 20-game stretches where they really seem to turn it on. And the biggest thing about Poku, I really should point this out, it wasn't like, I pointed out the triple-double, but that wasn't like followed up by, an 0 game and a really rough game. Like, Poku had a nice, consistent 4 or 5 week stretch, 3-4 week stretch where he was pretty on it every night.
Right.
And he was productive every night.
Yeah. And the other thing, too, about Poku, I remember us talking about this during this stretch for him. He watched a lot of film on his own, outside of just, what the coaches and the head coach, Mark Dagnall, had him watch. He was going back and rewatching games, learning from that, really tapping into the mental side of things. And we saw that play out on the floor with how he was able to anticipate things a little bit better and make sounder, kind of quicker decisions when he had the ball in his hand. So
absolutely,
really, really great to see by Poku this year.
Nice transition to your guy.
Sure is. Yes, it is. And mine is a little bit more subtle because I don't think it was as standout throughout the season like it was for Poku. But this is a guy who has continued to blossom offensively for the Thunder. He got his start on the defensive end, as we all know. Lu Dort, he has blossomed offensively in terms of his scoring. But an area where he really wanted to improve for himself was his decision-making.
Yeah.
When he took a step in being able to finish around the rim last season, kind of worked on that for himself and really be able to finish through contact better and finish some of those plays. But he also wanted to be able to make better decisions when he got downhill. And this is something that's really subtle, and the numbers don't necessarily show a big jump here for Lou. But it was more kind of the flow state, like we were talking about with that 6-minute stretch in Dallas. It seemed like his decisions were happening quicker, more confidently, and a little bit sharper than they were in years prior.
Yeah, and I think that allowed him to be a more efficient shooter.
Yeah.
I mean, he was over 40% from the three-point line in the corners. You have to remember he had that unbelievable stretch of 46 straight games with at least one three-pointer made. And, that was the third longest streak in Thunder history.
Yeah.
And at one point, it was Steph Curry and then him for the longest active streak of consecutive games with a made three-pointer. So
that is right.
Just really special stuff from Lou. And I feel like we've made this point about him in the past, but to have a guy that's as elite of a defender as he is, be such an efficient shooter from corner threes, you just map out the future of this team long term. And as a guy like Trey Mann develops and a guy like Josh Giddey develops alongside Shea and, whoever else is sort of a part of this next wave of the Thunder, to have a guy like Lou who you can have hanging in the corner as your fourth or fifth option who's ready to take that shot, put the ball on the deck and attack with that bowling ball attitude downhill and finish at the lane. That is a massive, massive threat.
Yes. And I think the most encouraging thing about this particular thing for Lou is that it was one step for him this season that he mentioned that he wanted to work on, right? And every season it feels like there was something that, I want to get better at finishing around the rim. Yeah, I want to get better about, my driving kick decisions. So that these guys are working and they are putting in the work to improve. So it's really cool to see it pay off. And it wasn't necessarily in the stats because, yes, he did have a career high in points per game this season, but, the turnovers were still there and the assist numbers were kind of the same that they were last season. But it was kind of the confidence factor for me that showed that, okay, he's getting better at this. He's getting more comfortable with this and he's learning as the season goes on. So that was something for me that I enjoyed watching this season.
Who doesn't like watching Lou?
Nobody doesn't like watching Lou. Come on now. All right, we got to give you what's on tap for this team moving forward. Obviously, we're still in the offseason, and I mentioned it probably 4 or 5 times. You're going to want to stay locked on OKCThunder.com and at OKC Thunder on all social channels throughout the offseason for all updates, especially coming up here soon, because this is going to be the last podcast you hear before the draft lottery.
Yeah, big time opportunity that lays ahead of the Thunder. We're going to find out where those 2 lottery picks that the Thunder has will land in this draft. Currently sort of projected, so to speak, at 4 and 12 with the Thunder's pick and then the LA Clippers pick that the Thunder has. But those ping pong balls, they can bounce in many which ways. So we're going to find out where exactly the Thunder is going to land. That obviously will dictate quite a bit in terms of who the Thunder will be able to select in this upcoming draft. But they've got a bevy of assets to, try to work with as well. And as we learned with the Josh Giddey selection, where you land doesn't necessarily dictate much because you end up with a guy that could be just excellent for you in the future anyway, even though the Thunder did, slip a couple spots in the lottery last year. So definitely be on the lookout for my preview article. We had an extensive conversation with Sam Presti at the end of season interviews about just the lottery in general and, his feeling that it's a total crapshoot. And as long as you think about it that way, then you'll be all right for your own mental sanity. So definitely be on the lookout for that before the NBA Draft Lottery, which is on May 17th.
And then after that, you can come right here to the Thunder Basketball Universe because we'll be podcasting again, recapping everything that happened during that draft lottery and reactions as well. Now that we'll have some information to work off of. So you're going to want to come back here after that. Until then, thank you so much for listening and watching. Be sure to like, rate, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Thank you so much to our producer, Matt Bishop. And until next time, Thunder up and catch you later.